out. Thank you so much all for coming. So, when Jessica was little, sorry.
I don't mind.
She told me a story a couple years ago. When Jessica was little, she had a gavel, and she told me that she would play with it. She'd be in her room, she'd be like, "Order in the court! Order in the court!" I was like, "Did you have anyone there with you?" She's like, "No." I was like, "Wait, you were calling order in your own court?" And I mean, in the moment, I thought that was absolutely hilarious. But that image of Jess calling order in her own court has stuck with me. And I realize it's because she calls order in her own court before she holds court for everyone else. And Jessica's been practicing astrology since 2007. She got her BA here at CIS in 2009, and that's when she started studying astrology with Rick Tarnas. And for the first year that Jessica was introduced to astrology, she just spent it studying her own birth chart before ever looking at someone else's. And that's what I mean by calling order in her own court before she invites us in, and she holds that space for us. So now Jessica is getting her master's degree at Pacifica Graduate Institute in clinical psychology,
Counseling
psychology with a concentration in depth psychology, and she's writing her thesis basically right now on shame, the relationship between shame and voice in fatherless daughters of patriarchy. So you're a very orderly court right now, so I don't feel like I have to call order here. So I would except you. So instead, let me call support from this court and help me welcome Jessica Garfield-Kabbara.
Thank you so much for coming. It's a real honor and pleasure to be able to share this Friday evening with each and every single one of you. Before we begin, I just really wanted to bring in awareness around creating a safe container here together tonight. I really feel that, there's a lot of wisdom present in this room, and a lot of voices that want to be heard, and a lot of things that want to be said that are probably quite sensitive, and sensitive to each one of us in a different way, depending on where we find ourselves within this death rebirth continuum. We get to share this journey together. We each have a slightly different perspective on it depending on our context. So we're going to have sensitivities to different things, and I'm not going to be able to be sensitive to all the things that you're sensitive to, but I can do my best to co-create a safe container with all of you, and you can help show me the areas that I'm not able to see, and maybe I'll help show you a couple things that maybe you're not able to see, and we'll be able to create this world together between us in this shared space. And so I just invite all of us to come into this room and to take a few deep breaths and ground deeply into our bodies, into this space, and inviting all of ourselves to this space. All are welcome here, all emotions, all thoughts, all feelings, all ideas, everything is welcome here. And together we'll co-regulate and reflect to each other through feeling our way through this material together what wants to emerge tonight. The transformation of silence into language is an act of self-revelation. The transformation of silence into language is an act of self-revelation. These words were spoken by the amazing Black lesbian poet Audre Lorde, and I would be misguided to be up here and to not think that everything that I say and do tonight is not an act of self-revelation. I'm fully exposed up here in front of all of you. If every philosophy is a confession, as Nietzsche says, so is every psychology, every talk, every moment. We are constantly revealing ourselves to each other. And that is extremely, extremely vulnerable thing to do. And the reason why it's so vulnerable is because we're wholly dependent on one another for our survival. Interdependency is what connects all of us. I cannot have an I cannot know myself, I cannot see myself without you. I couldn't come into this world without the body of my mother and the semen of my father going into her ovaries and her hosting my soul until I came out as an autonomous individual. So from the moment of conception through the other side of death, I am wholly dependent on all of you, and you're wholly dependent on me. And that is a very tender, vulnerable position for all of us to be in. But our species and the evolution of consciousness is completely based upon this very deep truth. And I feel at times in our modern age that we're trying to create a culture where somehow that's not true anymore, or fool ourselves to think that, you know, we can stand as individuals apart from the whole. And it's why we're able to kill each other. It's why we're able to kill this planet. So I want to stand up here and be transparent before we dive into the transits, the current astrological transits, where the planets are in the sky right now, to get a sense of what's moving through all of us, how Psyche's moving through all of us right now, and also my research on shame. And that is, I had an extremely difficult time preparing for this talk this week. It was actually quite painful. I tried to ask someone else to give it for me, a man who's a scholar in our community, who's brilliant, and I thought that would be more appropriate. You guys want to hear the facts. You want to hear about history, and you want to hear someone who's really, really well read, which isn't me. And then he couldn't do it, and I was like, oh, okay. And then I was like, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a panel up here. I'm going to ask 3 men that I really, really love to come up here, and we're going to have a panel, and we're going to have this dialogue. And then that didn't work. And I was like, oh, man. I was like, okay. So Matt and I are talking Monday night, and I still haven't agreed to do the talk. And I was like, what about this? What if I just talk for 15 minutes, and the rest of the time it's just total dialogue, and I'll just barely say anything? And he was like, yeah, that's great. You know, it's working really well with my psychological complexes there, and helping very kindly coax me, persuade me in. And I was like, who are we kidding? I like to talk. I'm going to talk for more than 15 minutes. But I still really, really want to dialogue. And I also really want to invite you at any point when I'm speaking tonight to raise your hand and say, hey, what are you talking about? Or can you explain this more? Or I have an idea here. Or I think there's a little thing that's being missed. Like, I so welcome all of your voices. And then the last part of it, of the transparency, is I didn't come up with the title of the talk. I didn't write the little description of it. Matt did. Matt titled the talk. So this beautiful man, you know, with his brilliant intellect, came up with this title for me and wrote it up, and I made some minor edits, you know. It was a collaboration at that point. And then my consciousness just shut down, and the stream and flow wasn't able to move through me this week, and I had no idea what I was going to say. And I started to feel all this pressure. I started to feel this pressure actually from my community, you know, and naturally it perfectly fits my own biographical issues around my sense of self-worth, which is, if I'm brilliant and I'm amazing and I can save you and liberate you from your problems, then I'm worthy to be here in this community with you. And you'll love me and you'll accept me and you won't reject me, and then everything will be okay, and I'll just take care of you and hold space for you and all your problems, and then maybe that means I'm worthy to occupy some of this space with you. And my perfectionism started to kick in. And I was like, fuck, this has to be the best talk ever. and I have to do all these things. And I was like, wait, down, kitty. Like, this is what you're writing your thesis on. Shame. What's at the root of perfectionism? Shame. Why do you feel shame right now? Because I feel inadequate to get up here for some reason and be with you in this place that is so tender, which is to talk about these things that are so taboo to talk about, like patriarchy. Whew! Like, wow, like we can intellectually have all kinds of conversations about it, but as soon as we start bringing in the affect of what it feels like to live in patriarchy, I get anxiety and I start to disassociate and leave my body and, you know, okay, come back. So I'm in the middle of writing my thesis, and it's a very raw process. I've been doing this research for 8 months, and I can't even tell what's happening anymore. But I'm writing it on shame and its relationship to voice, and it's coming from my own subjective experience. How could it not? Being a fatherless daughter, living in patriarchy, meaning there's many ways to be a fatherless daughter or a fatherless son. That can be a physical abandonment, which is what happened with my father. He left when I was 3 years old. That can be an emotional abandonment where they're not able to hold space for you and be present with your whole range of affect, from total joy and love and elation to fear and depression and sadness. That can be a psychological abandonment where they just aren't able to see you for who you are and honor your interiority and your subjectivity. They want you to be a certain way, a certain image of them, and if you don't live up to this image of them, then they're going to reject you or shame you. Or it can be a spiritual abandonment, lacking a meaningful connection with the father, with the mother, and then therefore to the cosmos, as our parents are mediators to the divine. It's how we first understand our own divinity, is through our relationship with them and how they relate to themselves and other people. And we're learning that through mimesis. We're absorbing everything by just watching our parents. And so there's many different forms of abandonment, and each one of us most likely has one or multiple of those. And then within the larger context of patriarchy, which we'll get into in the second half of the talk. So before we dive into shame, our favorite affect, I would like to discuss the current transits a little bit to give us some grounding and context. Yeah, like this. Yeah. Thanks, Chad. Okay. So, in a second, the current transits will come up where the planets are in the sky right now. And this is the archetypal field that we're all embedded in right now, that we're all living in and co-creating with and is moving through us. And the main thing that's happening right now is we're in an outer planet alignment of Uranus square Pluto. It's a 90-degree angle. It's right here. This is Uranus here, 8 degrees Aries, and it's a square. That's this red line, this thick red line, to the planet Pluto here at 9 Capricorn. It's really tight. It's a degree. And usually the tighter it is, the more potent it is, the more powerful it is. This began around 2007, and it goes through 2020. So we have about 7 more years of it, 6 more years of it, but we're in the heart of it right now. We're in the core of it. This is like, the belly of the whale. Like, this is it. We're in it. It's really tight. And we'll start with Pluto. So Pluto has a lot to do with the topics tonight. Pluto represents transformation and evolution through the death rebirth mystery. Right? It's destruction in order to make room for creation. So there's both a highly destructive quality to it, but also a regenerative quality to it. It is that paradox through which we all incarnate, right? The first entrance into paradox is that as these aquatic beings living in these fetuses, undifferentiated from our mother in this amniotic fluid, we have to die as this aquatic being in order to be reborn as an air-breathing mammal. So we enter this life through death in order to be reborn, right? Two different sides of the same coin. That's Pluto. It is the ultimate paradox. It is the driving force of evolution, of these polarities dancing with one another all of the time. So Pluto, being the death rebirth process, also relates to the underworld. It is our instincts. It's the Freudian id. It's all that which we tend to repress in our current culture. Sex, death, birth, the biological, the scatological, right? It's the chthonic. It's the darkness. It's the mysterious. And like all archetypes, there's light and shadow. And so Pluto in its shadow form, well, first, it is the element of power, right? It's primordial, it's power, right? It's the instincts, it's the will. So the shadow form of Pluto has to do with power struggles or violent, murderous hatred, the darkest aspect of our psyche that we so do not want to own, that the more I love you, the more I fucking hate you too, right? I have such deep love, and I can have equal hatred for you. And the aggression, the primal aggression, the pre-verbal aggression that is raw and messy and irrational. It's scary, it's terrifying. All of civilization is about learning how to control it and compartmentalize it and maintain it and channel it in ways, so we don't kill each other. Not quite working yet, but we're getting there. And my computer's gonna die. I got one too. Yeah, thanks. And then we have Uranus. And Uranus is related to Prometheus, and it awakens and liberates and emancipates whatever it touches, right? It's the archetype of rebirth. And so Uranus right now, with Uranus square Pluto, is liberating and awakening the depths of the unconscious, the depths of the underworld, the depths of the chthonic. And so it is associated with the return of the repressed. All that which we repress individually into our personal unconscious, and all that we repress collectively in our collective unconscious, which is stored in Pluto, is being awakened, unearthed, excavated, unchained by Uranus right now. And it's beautiful and it's brilliant because it allows for transformation and evolution, and we tend to like those things in this community. But it's messy and it's painful. And what is the affect that is all tied up around that which we repress? Shame. The things that we are shameful of, the parts of ourselves that we do not want to own or acknowledge or feel as us, the parts of ourselves that we make other, the parts of ourselves where we say, anything that does not fit with this image of my ego, I'm going to repress down into the depths of my unconscious and keep it there with as much force as possible, because at some point along the way, I was told that it wasn't safe for me to be identified or feel this affect, to feel this experience. And so I repress it to protect myself. It's a protective mechanism. So if right now is the return of the repressed and all of our kind of unconscious material is getting unearthed, then it seems really central that we begin to really address shame. If that is what is both having us repress things in the unconscious and also what is in the unconscious, things that we're shameful of. Yeah. And I'll just bring in one more part, and that is Venus. Here, 15, Capricorn, conjunct Pluto, square Uranus. And Venus is Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. And it relates to Eros. It relates to our hearts, and it relates to our relationships, both social and romantic. So with Venus in the alignment with Uranus square Pluto and the return of the repressed, we're in this really, pretty rare time period for the next 4 months, where Venus is going to continue to move in the sky, and it's going to get to 28 Capricorn, and it's going to station retrograde, meaning from our perspective here on Earth, it's going to stop, and then its apparent motion is going to move backwards. And what happens is it comes all the way back into conjunction with Pluto, square Uranus, and then it'll stop again and move forward, and that will take us all the way till March. So we have this really rare 4-month period with this much larger outer planetary alignment of the Uranus square Pluto that we have to the end of the decade. But right now, for the next 4 months, over the holidays, Venus is going to be in there. And it's interesting, she actually stations retrograde from the night of the solstice into the 22nd, and the darkest night of the year. So the return of the repressed with the feminine, and with love, and with relationships. Venus, Pluto, I always think of this phrase Rumi says, shatter my heart so I may love more deeply. Break me open and have me be split apart so that I have to learn how to stretch myself to hold these inherent paradoxes that I live with and that I share with each one of you. It's like I have to constantly be growing and expanding my heart in order to be able to continue to love myself and love you. And you challenge me all the time to do that when you hurt me, when you disappoint me, when you let me down, when you abandon me, when I feel unworthy, when I don't feel loved by you. How do I continue to show up in your presence and love you and hold you in compassion and hold you in a good way when I feel you've done me wrong? How do I continue to love you through that? You shatter my heart. You challenge me to be a better person by all the ways in which we don't meet up, and you're not perfectly attuned to me, and you don't perfectly mirror my inner world. You are the way in which I grow. And I think that's going to be a really big theme for all of us, and I think it already is. So that's some of the current transits. We can get more into it later if we want. Yeah, sure. Ooh. All right.
Can I ask you to maybe
Please.
discover something?
Yeah, please.
I know that the Uranus-Pluto is happening in square to my Saturn, which means if anybody in here is anywhere between 31 and 34, it's also happening in their Saturn.
Yeah.
Maybe you could explore what that means for us generationally. We're all just coming out of our Saturn return, and now we're in the middle of this.
Love it. Yeah.
It kind of sucks.
Yeah. I love it. No, I love that. That's a really good point. Yeah, so the Uranus square Pluto is going to be hitting a different part of every person's chart. That's called your personal transits. And if you were born from, 1970... What year were you born?
Well, 81, but I think so. It went in, Saturn went into Libra, then back into Virgo, so
Okay.
I don't know, 80, 81, 82.
Yeah, if you're
someone around there.
Yeah, if you're born in probably the late 70s or early 80s, or 80, 81, 82. I know that year. Yeah. Then the Uranus square Pluto is going to be happening on your Saturn, but for each and every single one of you, it's going to be hitting a different part of your chart. And So transits activate our psyche. It's how we are able to track the unfoldment of our psyche through time in this relationship with the cosmos. So we're talking about once-in-a-lifetime transits that are happening. So in this case, let's go into this. Saturn represents our own authority. It represents the boundaries that we have. It represents the structures and systems in our life that hold us. It's the foundation of our being. It's also how we gain a sense of mastery through devotion and hard work, focus and discipline. It's it's our work in the world. It's our actual vocation, it's our career, but it also represents our karma, that which we have come into this world with and that we need to find a way to work with in order to not only be of great service to ourselves in our own personal growth process, but also service to the world. Saturn also represents and correlated to patriarchy. And so I've been thinking a lot lately about where Saturn is in the natal chart and how specifically your soul might be participating within patriarchy, both how you come up against it in your own life, maybe potentially with the relationship with your own father, which is also the principle of Saturn is the father. And also in the psyche, Saturn represents the superego, and that's the moral conscience or judge that, you know, we interject to be this moral guiding compass for us, and at times tends to be the main inner voice. Sometimes Saturn can forget that it's part of a pantheon. Sometimes it can forget why it was created to be a vessel for the other, to create the structures for the other energies to come through and to mediate it. Sometimes it can start to take over and become rigid and dogmatic, and that's when it becomes problematic, when we solely identify with that superego voice that's going on inside of all of us, critiquing ourselves, critiquing others, judgment, blame, criticism. Those are the shadow sides of Saturn, but it's also discernment and how we're able to manifest and incarnate and give form to material things, to actually make things real and bring them into consensus reality and ground them and give it form. So I think where Saturn is in the chart within the patriarchal context is both how you're participating in it, potentially perpetuating it, how it came up for you in your family of origin, but then also the ways in which you're able to move through it and transform it and work with it. And so with Pluto beginning to square that, it is the transformation and evolution through the deconstructing of Saturn and how it shows up in your life in order to make room for this new creative, regenerative energy. So it's an actual structural transformation, like the deepest structures in your psyche are then coming apart and being opened up, particularly with Uranus in there, which seeks to open up, emancipate, and liberate, but can be extremely destabilizing because the change can be, you know, quite radical and at times erratic and come in and blindside you. You know, all of a sudden it feels like the rug's being pulled out from under you and you're falling and you're like trying to grasp for something and you realize, oh, I have to actually create the new structure to hold the foundation of my being so I can come into the world again, because the structures I was living within were these external structures that aren't actually serving my soul and my purpose. So it's about it kind of reteaching you to, instead of molding yourself to these outside things, which is an objectification, like, you know, I have to mold myself into this certain model or framework that already exists, instead of having it move from within your own subjective interiority and calling upon your own wisdom. That's what Saturn is. It's your own wisdom that you accrue from your own suffering and your own pain and your own loss, and by grieving and feeling as deeply as possible your own pain, your own sense of inferiority, the ways in which you have had interpersonal losses in your life, a loss of a parent or a child or a lover or a friend or a job or something that gave you a sense of a cohesive ego and that was meaningful to you, that those interpersonal losses then get translated into intrapsychic losses. So starting to address the ways you've abandoned yourself, the ways that you have lost parts of your own self. And so Saturn calls us to begin to draw upon our own inner wisdom. And so when Pluto and Uranus hits it, it breaks open all those structures and systems in your life and says, okay, it's time to recreate something here that is more in alignment with your true potential, your soul's calling, your karma. How are you going to give birth to that? How are you going to make that happen? It's like those are some of the themes that maybe would come up. Yeah.
Just so I have some idea of like what patriarchy is.
Yeah.
It's kind of like this, like,
Yeah.
you know, could you just really simply describe it as like power structures that we're living within that were created by a group of people who happen to be men and comes out of that kind of, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
How do you
Totally. Oh, I know, I've been wrestling with this one. So I would like to ask everyone here to help with this one, and I'd like Delia to help here too, and anyone else that feels called. What I'm most sensitive to is I don't know how to talk about patriarchy without being patriarchal. I don't know how to get myself out of this institution that I'm so deeply embedded in. I mean, it's so deep in our collective unconscious. I would be a fool to sit here and think that I somehow have figured out a way to talk about it without continuing to view it through the lens through which I'm seeing it. I mean, I'm gonna be honest, I'm a misogynist. Like, I think all of us are. I mean, I think the most radical feminists are still misogynists, and it fucking breaks my heart, but it's true. I know it's so deep, it's so unconscious, and you can't move through something until you become conscious of it and feel your way through it. And so I just want to honor that first before before I sit here and try to say some things about what patriarchy is from my patriarchal lens. It's institutionalized power structures that tend to be based upon a model of domination and control. And it's power exists no matter what. So it's our relationship with power that defines how we show up in relationships. So it's a certain way of relating that seems to create certain dialectics, like a break in power, master-slave, teacher-student. Not that there's anything inherently wrong about that, but there's a dichotomy of power that's taking place. And it seems to stem out of the objectification of the other. So the other, it loses its subjectivity, and we objectify it, we make it an it instead of a thou, and therefore we're able to relate to it in a way that creates a sense of separation and distance, which is really, beautiful in the sense that, as Rick and others writes about, it gives us a sense of autonomy and differentiation. So I don't want to say that patriarchy is pathological by any means. There's light and shadow to all things, but it's created such a deep othering that we're able to kill each other, and we're able to kill this planet, and we're dying as a species because you've lost your interiority and I've lost mine because of this style of relating. Do you want to say anything about it, Delia, or does anyone else want to help me out here? Start to verbalize what's so hard to articulate in ways?
Jessica and I were talking about this afternoon, trying to grapple with this, and I find it sort of terrifying to try to articulate what I see patriarchy as being. But I think that sense of the capacity to lose touch with the subjectivity of the other, which dehumanizes or desubjectifies it, is inherently born out of some kind of loss of affective connection. And I can speak mostly to what my own experience has been, or the experience that I have I've seen my clients as psychotherapists, I've seen them grappling with, which really has to do with what we all go through when we're not able to feel the mutual relationship that we're fully capable of, to feel ourselves as inherently inferior to something else connotes a loss of some important part of ourselves and of our value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think you're pointing to the part of, I like how you brought in the affect. If there's not mutuality, then you can't feel the other person. You lose empathy, you lose the ability to be in relationship where both people are valued and seen as equals, or both things that are involved with human nature or whatever it may be. Yeah, anyone else? Yeah.
The point you bring up quite a bit, I think, is related when someone starts to narrate your story for you.
Yeah.
You start being treated as an object that one thinks can be completely known from the outside. And if you're really in a subject-subject relationship, one gets to narrate their own story because they are a subject, and it's only when one's subjectivity is not accepted or is undermined that one could presume to think that they could know the other wholly in some way.
Right. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, there's an ethical imperative for all of us to be able to tell our own story. And there's a lot of voices that have been silenced because there is very particular values that we have to live by in this culture. And if we don't live by those values, we're seen as deviant, we're seen as bad, as wrong, as something to be controlled. And so many voices are being silenced in that process because in order to be heard, you have to speak a certain language. And if my language doesn't fit your language, then you're not going to hear me. And, you know, for women, I'll just speak for myself as a woman, you know, I've lost touch with my mother tongue. I don't remember how to speak as a woman. I forget how to speak from my body, how to trust my intuition, how to trust the images that arise for me. Because they're not rational enough, they're not empirical enough. I don't have a citation for them. I can't empirically validate it for you enough. And so I learned by the age of 6 that I am not as valued in this world as men are. I knew that I had to be different if I wanted to survive. If I wanted to make it, and if I wanted to be accepted, I needed to be more masculine and carry certain qualities. And so I started to become a perfectionist who achieved and got straight A's and was the best at everything I could do. And I wanted to be like the boys. I wanted to walk like the boys, talk like the boys, think like the boys. I wanted to do everything the boys did because that's what this world loved. This world loved boys. And I lost myself and I forgot myself. And part of this experience of writing about shame and voice is I have tremendous shame around my voice, and I'm terrified to write because putting my voice in a concrete form literally sends me into a fight or flight mechanism trauma response because, you know, first of all, why is anything I have to say even important or worthy? Second of all, what if someone else already said it and I didn't cite it properly? What if, you know, you mistake what I'm saying and judge me for it and then reject me, and then all of a sudden I'm not welcome at your table anymore to be in conversation with you? And so I decided to write about the very thing I was most terrified around because I didn't know how to write. And I was like, well, I guess this is the first step. I have to address that I have shame around my voice and around speaking in this world as a woman. And so, yeah, how do we start to create safe spaces for every voice to be heard when we might not be able to even hear those voices and understand what it is that they're saying at first because it doesn't match our model of knowing. It doesn't fit within our epistemological framework. It doesn't, you know, sound or feel the way that I was conditioned to know things. You know, our languages aren't the same. And how do we start doing that? Because it seems that the ways in which we're relating right now, we're killing each other. So it seems like the only way to stop killing each other and, you know, have this ecological crisis not be the end of our species is finding new pathways of relating and connecting. There's whole worlds that are waiting to be birthed between all of us, but we first have to figure out how to open up that space, the liminal, the space between us, to get access to those visions and those ideas, those dreams that are waiting in our shared morphic field, in our shared unconscious. Because right now, the way that we're accessing information and sharing it isn't working anymore. It's dying. It worked for a while, and death doesn't mean failure, and death doesn't mean it was a mistake. It just means that it's time for a transformation and time for a change. And so I'm curious on how we start to open up these new pathways of connection, these new ways of relating with one another. And it seems that the ways in which we're blocked from opening up this space between us has to do with the ways in which we have shame. The ways in which I feel shame around sharing myself with you, and the ways you have shame around sharing yourself with me. Those are blocks that we have in our psyche that we use a tremendous amount of psychic energy to try to keep hidden. So I'm going to go a little bit into shame, and then we can pick up some more on this, and I think it might help ground it a little more. So I'm going to read a definition of shame. So shame is it's a universal human experience. Every single person experiences it except sociopaths, because they are incapable of feeling empathy. So every one of us has shame. It transcends all cultures, all age groups, all socioeconomic statuses, all religions, all spiritual traditions. We all experience it. It's a very natural part of the human experience. The psychological effects of it are becoming more predictive and better understood, and we'll go into that. So first, Brené Brown, this amazing researcher on shame, you can see her TED Talks online, says that first, shame is the fear of disconnection. We are psychologically, emotionally, cognitively, and spiritually hardwired for connection, love, and belonging. Connection, along with love and belonging, two forms of connection, is why we are here, and what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. Shame is the fear of disconnection. It's the fear that something we've done or we have failed to do, an ideal that we've not lived up to, or a goal that we've not accomplished makes us unworthy of connection. I'm unlovable. I don't belong. She says, shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. So we can see why it's such a terrifying, excruciatingly painful affect, because if we're hardwired for love and belonging, and then we feel disconnected, our very survival is being threatened. So shame, it turns out, is at the root of all addictions and all compulsive behaviors. So alcoholism, drug abuse, substance abuse. It's at the root of perfectionism. It's at the root of eating disorders. It's at the root of aggression and violence and bullying. It also fuels judging and blaming and criticizing and me pointing my finger at you instead of taking a deeper look at myself. And there's three main ways that people deal with shame. First is moving away, right? So withdrawing, avoiding, numbing, masking, turning my head this way, anything I can to get distance from feeling that affect of feeling unworthy and belonging. I will do anything to excavate it out of my psyche. You know, it's such a primal response. So I'm gonna have another drink. I'm gonna take another smoke. I'm gonna do another drug. I'm gonna check out. I'm gonna get on the internet. I'm gonna watch some TV. I'm gonna do anything I can do not to feel right now. The second way is moving toward, and this one's a little I think harder to see, and that's when we begin to please and we begin to placate, when we start to caretake, right? So if I self-sacrifice my wants and needs in order to make you feel better and take care of you, I'm caretaking you, I'm caretaking your emotions, I'm pleasing you, I'm placating you, so we don't rock the boat, we want to keep the harmony, we don't want any conflict. It's because I'm feeling unworthy of being here with you, and I get my sense of worth by making sure you're okay. And if you're okay, then I'm okay. And then the third way is moving against, and that's aggression, right? Judging, blaming, criticizing, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, and then using shame to shame, right? I'm going to shame you. I feel shame, so I'm going to shame you. The second you start feeling shamed by someone, you instantly know they're feeling shame. They're trying to excavate the shame and put it on you. They don't want to hold it anymore. So using shame to shame. So the sources of shame, why does this happen? So the source of shame is when there is a break in the mutuality of our relationship. You can see it with children very easily, right? So parents can't always be perfectly attuned to the child. They can't know all of the child's needs and wants and desires and the whole interiority. I mean, we barely know that ourselves. So to expect another person to constantly track that and know that and then relate to you in that way, is impossible. But shame happens when there's a break or a schism in the relationship between two or more people, right? When that disconnection happens. And there's all kinds of ways that can happen, but it's mainly a sense of feeling unseen, not valued, not heard, not respected, and it's internalized when one is abandoned, right? So I mentioned before we can have physical abandonment, emotional abandonment, psychological abandonment, spiritual abandonment. When any form of abandonment happens, it's a form of abuse, right? So neglect is a form of abuse. So abandonment is a form of abuse. And it's how we lose a sense of our authentic self. We cease to exist psychologically when we're abandoned. And children cannot know themselves without being mirrored. We don't know who we are unless we have the mirroring of our loved ones, of our parents. And it's crucial for the beginning years of our life to form a cohesive sense of self, a good ego that's able then, once it leaves the home environment, to face the world and all of the different things that come up when you move out into the world. And parents who are shut down emotionally, like most of ours are shame-based parents, right? They live with a lot of shame themselves, so there's an abandonment of themselves, therefore they abandon you because they can't show up from their self, so they can't show up for you, and therefore they can't mirror and affirm your emotions. And so what happens is, well, let's say one day you're sad, or you're hurt, or you're scared, and your parent isn't able to mirror you and hold you in that, or even worse, shames you. Don't cry, get it together, not now, this isn't the right place. You internalize in that moment that there's something bad, there's something wrong with you, because the child is incapable in its egocentrism to recognize that it's the parent's issue. So it's safer for the child to make itself bad and wrong than the parent bad or wrong, because if the parent's bad or wrong, then the child's survival is threatened because their caretaker is bad. So it's easier for us to make ourselves bad. So that's what's happening there. And those transactions are crazy making for us, and we form all kinds of defense mechanisms around that sense of feeling inferior and inadequate, and it's also the source of some of our deepest creativity. Those places where we feel voids inside of ourselves, those places where we feel like we weren't met, those wounds that we carry, our deepest wounds, are often our greatest gifts, because it's us being in relationship with those parts of ourselves that feel inferior that is a driving catalyst for us to find ways to be able to tolerate living with ourselves. And usually our most creative projects and ideas and gifts come out of our shame. Yeah, jump in.
I think in part that comes from the incredible sensitivity of the parts that receive the wounds. So that, with the incredible preciousness of the places that we can be the most creative, are usually the places where we experience rejection and woundedness, or rejection and wounds most acutely. And then we tend to go into the shame cycle that you're describing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the link between creativity and shame, as well as, that woundedness can lead to a lot of really.
Will you say that? Sorry, will you say it again?
Yeah, that it is usually in the parts of our psyches that are the most vulnerable and the most precious that we receive the wounds that become
right.
the seed of shame for us.
Right.
And it is.
Could you give an example?
Well, sure. I mean, I think that as a young child, if you are you're expressing your creativity or your basic aliveness in any way, and your parent or someone else comes along and says, "Don't do that. That's bad." That what you experience is a sense of rejection of this. It's kind of like. We can think about it archetypally, that it could be some sort of basic Mars coming forward, or some kind of Venusian creativity, and if that gets shamed, then we develop a sense of acute pain, and then the shame cycle that you've been describing happens.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the awful cycle of perpetuating that can take place.
Right.
We see somebody doing something that we ourselves are no longer allowed to do, and we have to make the other person bad for having that experience that we have, deprived ourselves of.
And is that also the source of envy?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm envious of the things that you represent to me that I have rejected inside of myself, or don't allow myself to feel that I can be as well.
Yeah, if I have cut myself off from something, or I have had it cut off from me, because I've been told that it's bad or wrong, if I see somebody else freely expressing that, I'm going to feel envy of that person, or worse, I'm going to feel rejection or disgust, contempt for that person being able to express that energy that I'm not allowing myself.
And so would you say that in that case, the intelligence of envy is a beautiful road into yourself to begin to grieve the ways in which you have lost that part of yourself, and to feel your way through what that's been like to abandon yourself in that way?
Absolutely, and I think that if we can have the kind of compassion with ourselves to look at it that way, and recognize that those feelings come from our woundedness, and be able to, in effect, re-nurture the parts of ourselves that we have experienced wounds in, that envy can be an incredible spur to our development.
And so that makes me think of how shame is a relational wound, right? So shame is a break in relationship. It's a social wound, and therefore it needs a social balm, which is, it seems that can only really truly be healed in, by, and through relationship. So it seems that you can do as much, inner work on your own as you want, but there becomes a point where you have to then start to be witnessed in that place of the shame, and most preferably that person loves you and accepts you, and in those places that you feel the shame, you feel inferior or bad or wrong, and if you have that experience of someone else loving you and accepting you, it creates the space inside of yourself to start to learn to love yourself and accept yourself, which then naturally generates you to love the other person and see them more clearly, and then it starts this recursive feedback loop where we can start to have this eros flow through us, where it's like, I accept and love you, therefore you accept and love yourself more, then you can love and accept me more, and then we start to have empathy for each other, and the mutuality is, the relationship is mutual now. It's not broken anymore, where I'm better than you, or you're better than me, or I'm more involved than you, or you're more involved than me, or whatever you want to say to create this break of power, essentially. Yeah.
I have a question. So, what you're like, the healing of shame that's transferred between two people, like ideally it works out that way.
Yeah.
But like you're pointing out, is we're growing up in a society that a lot of the time has taught that to be dominant is to be safe. And so, like for instance, I struggle so much with how to address how I'm shamed in my family, because I can't sit down family members and describe, let's start at patriarchy. Or, you know, so I struggle with how to heal a relationship. Now I'm 31. I'm not a child anymore. And sometimes I feel like I'm supposed to know how to be with it already, and I'm supposed to be strong enough not to feel shamed. But that's not real. That doesn't happen.
No, of course not.
I totally feel it.
Yeah.
But I don't get to choose how the other person, when they're gonna open up and help me heal this. And if they're not ready yet, they're not ready yet. So how can we approach those relationships that we have compassion for, because we know we're growing up in a society based upon dominance, and it's so embedded in some people that it's really hard for them to see it and stop it, and to stop shaming you for going a different path or whatever it is, or stop using shame to teach you.
Right.
But then it's hard to be in those relationships. But say when it's your family, you want to be in them for the rest of your life. You want to have your family. So, like, how can you approach that?
Yeah.
When ideally, you can sit down and be like, let's heal this and recognize the dominance. But like,
it's a great question. I think Jahan might have some things to say to that, and maybe some people over here. But most of my healing has. Where I have most of my shame with my parents does not happen with my parents. It happens with my therapist, it happens with my lover, it happens with, my dearest friends. Those people are able to see me for who I am without putting value judgments upon me, that allow me to gain deeper self-acceptance and self-love, which gives me a more cohesive sense of self, that therefore isn't as affected or impacted in a way where it's completely destroys my sense of self when my mother judges me or doesn't see me or isn't able to meet me. It's like learning how to tolerate the disappointment, but not identifying with it as like a core sense of who you are, like, oh, I'm a disappointment, or I'm bad, or whatever it is, or even more so, she's bad. My mother, it's psychological splitting. My mother's all bad, or she's all wrong, or she can't do anything right. To begin to be able to see them and their pain and their wound and go, wow, you're really wounded. And out of your pain, you're shaming me right now, and I'm going to have compassion for that. But I also have compassion for myself, which means I have to value myself enough to put up a boundary with you right now to say, you're not a safe person for me to be really vulnerable with, so you only get a little sliver of my life, and I'm going to save the rest of it for people who are able to hold it and to love it. And because my presence is a gift, and I'm not going to just share my inner life with you if you're not able to respect that. And like, I'm going to also like not shame you back, and I'm going to be the parent here, and I'm going to be the adult here and love you through you shaming me, but I'm also going to value myself enough to not put myself in situations where you can continue to abuse me, because it's abusive to do that. And
kind of like a redemption of Saturn in a way, also to move from dominance to discernment and just boundaries. And you said identification, and that makes me remember Brene Brown also, and she said the core difference between people who experience a lot of shame and people who don't is the identification that you are bad versus, or that you inherently don't belong versus this is a bad situation.
Yeah.
The identification piece.
Yeah, I love that. And I also think it's important to speak your truth, which means like, I don't like the way you're treating me right now. I feel really bad right now with the way that you're talking to me. You're really hurting my, it really hurts my feelings when you speak to me like this, using I statements, and just, saying it once or twice and letting the person know, to give them the opportunity to maybe do it differently. But if they continue to do it, say, okay, enough's enough. Thank you, that's enough, and it's painful because you want connection with those people. They're your family, they're your blood. And and they're the ones that can hurt us the most because we're the closest to them. So it's, I don't know, does someone else want to say something about that? Yeah, Chad?
Just my own personal experience on top of everything that you said that was just wonderful, is archetypal astrology has been something that I can't, has so much benefit to contextualize, like, say, family relationships to the point where I can see certain complexes in them and I have compassion for their state and the way that they're treating me relative to their archetypal dynamics. The same is true for myself when I feel change in my own being and I see different aspects of my chart that go into that, or different transits that are happening. It takes me out of the absolute responsibility aspect of it. At the same time that it seems to require more responsibility on my part to engage with the archetypes that I know are in transit or not in my daily chart in order to try and move to a more noble expression of them aligned with my higher sense of self. Does that make sense?
Matt?
Dealing with family made me think of how you first started trying to define patriarchy. We talked about an institutional structure that's based on control
Yeah.
and coercion. And it made me think of a family dynamic where, because the father, the patriarch, needs to make something happen instead of letting something happen. When that, in relationship to love, there's this image of the patriarchal father who will say to the child, "You love your daddy, don't you? Like, you love me, right?" And not as a question, but as a statement, rather, like, you have to love me. And the child gets put in a position where it feels like love is not something that spontaneously emerges, but rather something that if you don't feel, you should be guilty that you don't feel that for your family. You're supposed to feel love for your family. And it's as if patriarchy creates that situation where a child will feel shame if they don't naturally love their parents.
Or their siblings.
Or their siblings, right. And, there's a sort of a process that will unfold where when you have to do something, you kind of naturally feel resistance to it. When, if there was more trust in just letting be, I feel like that love would emerge in a more spontaneous way. And this gets to the light and shadow of patriarchy. Like, the father wants to create a container that's safe and really wants to care for the family if they're a father, or for the kingdom if they're the king or whatever. But that container it creates claustrophobia because it's just so overbearing and so controlling, and it treats everyone else as a child, as if the king or the father or whoever was the only adult. And this comes through in family dynamics and governmental dynamics and in religion.
Most definitely.
And it feels like, the title of this talk, Trusting Psyche.
Yes.
We need to step into a world where we can trust the eros that naturally emerges in psychological fields between people.
Right.
Trying to force it.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah, Rick.
I was following up on a couple of these, and so much of what you've been saying. I like the idea of finding a perspective that allows a context, a recontextualizing, that allows for more compassion and towards others in these situations that we're talking about, and towards ourselves. And you brought up, Archetypal astrological, and this the description you were bringing up, Matt, about the father who demands love, and the wanting to care, create a container, but then becomes claustrophobic. And all the language you've been using about shame being connected to the feeling of abandonment, not feeling worthy, etc. So I've been thinking, you started with the Ionosphere plural, the Plutonic. The nature of the Plutonic is, it's those instinctual depths. It's you mentioned the Freudian id, and below the Freudian id is, in a sense, the Darwinian nature and the Dionysian. And if we look at all the higher primates, out of which Homo sapiens is, or our closest kin, almost all of them are patriarchal. Quite, those species, like patriarchy doesn't just come out of Homo sapiens. So the Plutonic has patriarchal potential, domination, power, etc. It's a very Plutonic phenomenon. Now, the Plutonics also, it's interestingly, in terms of the patriarchy that stands research, many people come back with experiences from reliving their birth where they recognize two big things. One is how much patriarchy is a reaction formation to the tremendous power of the human body as experienced in birth and from gestation, birth, and for most people their early childhood. We are like nothing compared to the power of the female.
Yeah.
So there's that level of the compensatory defense, and the fact that that's the last thing I'll say is the experience of shame. And that is, there seem like the most extreme forms of shame, like where one is like burning shame, where the face is hot with intolerable shame. It seems to be connected to that experience of radical abandonment that takes place in the expulsion from the womb, and in the experience of certain stages of the birth process. There's such a your face is getting just flattened out, incredible pressure. The pyrocatharsis is happening, the ring of fire is coming out, and people who've experienced it at a deep level get it archetypally too, so that they're experiencing being shoved down into, like, you are nothing, you are so worthless, you are being expelled from where you had been the loved, appreciated, seen as a center of this universe, and now that container has indeed become possible, and one is being pressed out, and there's a god behind there, and a goddess, so of course Shiva, Kali, different Jehovah, into play. We all have that deep sources of primordial shame that then get treat like a child, etc., and become claustrophobic. And that, so what I'm pointing towards is that, getting back to this Plutonic, is that nature seems to have sources of patriarchy, domination, of shame, and all of them are also connected to birth, and that it seems to be like it's the second birth, it's the reliving of birth, which requires going through the hellhole of shame. abandonment and feelings that, really, you feel like you're the most worthless thing in the universe when you're living. So then when that starts to leak out in everyday life, and it's played out in dynamics, like a mother or father says, if you knew how much pain you caused me when you were born, that it can reactivate that primordial shame, guilt, etc. So what I'm pointing towards is, in a way, a way that we can kind of contextualize it in a larger field of archetypal worth, and that even patriarchy, and the idea of patriarchy is the 5,000-year birth canal of the great mother goddess. Patriarchy seems to have a lot to do with the differentiating, spelling, judging, contracting, holding in the instincts as you're trying to release them, etc. And it may, like a larger mystery, maybe being unfolded. This shame with patriarchy, PCC in some sense gives a lot of different clues to the mind, so to speak, that are helpful. It's the astrological way of entering into people, having compassion for another person's birth chart, or having very powerful methods of internal journeying and catharsis that allow you to access those archetypal levels of the processing, shame, etc. All that being said, what you have been doing here tonight, I feel, just carries so crucially the nuances of interpersonal, sort of outside the perinatal, like just what it is to live in community, intimate relationship, and deep inner work, etc. These other ways, ordinary states of consciousness, can go a long ways towards making it a lot easier to see the other as a vowel rather than the shaming, etc. Nevertheless, there's no substitute for the amount of beautiful, nuanced, psychological, even personal sensitivity and discernment encouragement that you and Delia and each person that's been talking tonight is
Yeah, thank you for all that. Oh yeah, a lot came up for me when you spoke. I think one being is in experiencing my own re-experiencing my perinatal trauma, my death rebirth process, I've gone to that place of feeling like the most worthless thing in the entire universe, and that struggle of that life or death struggle of coming out of my mother, and accessing a deep hatred toward my mother, which is a very painful thing to feel. However, to live in a world where we mistreat in a form of domination and control is mistreat that which gave birth to us, instead of honoring and having deep reverence and respect, feels to me as a woman the deepest act of betrayal. We are destroying our mother planet that allows us to exist. We're destroying women, and I feel that I am dying because of the way that I'm treated as a woman, and I can no longer go on carrying this affect that usually men don't want to feel. So like just naturally in the interpersonal field, like when emotions are present and one person doesn't want to feel it, the other one has to, because they have to go somewhere. And usually it not always, but it tends to be the woman, because just naturally, like our bodies are more permeable because they're made for another soul to enter them, and we actually hold another soul inside of our womb, and then our menstruation cycle. And so just naturally we tend to be a little bit more permeable to energetic dynamics. And then the way we condition our boys is to not feel, which is such a disservice to you, and I am so sorry that we do that to you. But I want to bring in a discussion about how we live with feelings and live with emotions and live with affect, because I'm dying over here. Every time you don't want to feel your pain or your sadness or whatever it is, and then I have to feel it, or the most vulnerable person in the room has to feel it. It literally is killing us with cancer and different diseases. And I want to know how we start to shift that, because it really hurts a lot. Yeah, Jahan and then Josh.
I was thinking about like how my beginning in a family, like with the father, if he feels what he terms weakness, given by a standard of society, and he won't let himself feel that, he'll abandon that part of himself. And so if that ever comes up in a family member, he will have to shun that too, because it cannot be part of his experience. And it starts with that self-abandonment. In my personal life, when I came across the word shame at 26, like I thought it's something I'd never felt. Like it was totally outside of my experience. And yet, at 28, like I was drenched in it. And I realized like this is what's been in the background the whole time. Now I can discern it. And during that period, I couldn't do anything but be in it. Every time I'd engage people and say where I'm at, people would either squirm and shy away or come closer. And it turned out as like if somebody was willing to go in their shame, like they were really compassionate, opening, and they can come with me and heal. And yet a lot of people could not like run away, and they would ditch you. Like that what feels like when you're in your shit. And they're like, whoa, this is not cool. Like this is obviously not what I want to be around, or less, in fear, and they'd run away. So it's just strange to see, the people that would come and go, and the people that could stay with you, and they'd be with you at that depth when you're in the muck or mud.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Josh?
I can really feel you as you speak. It's a very, very heavy topic. So it's quite an honor to have you express your vulnerability, because it really brings life to it. I'm taking that and taking what you just said, Rick, putting the two together. What makes sense to me is this larger story of her. And somehow knowing that we might actually be in some sort of birth process as a species, as I've seen articulated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times in so many different ways from this community and others. What that actually means to me is some sort of belief that it's actually possible, and also that we will actually choose. I don't have it all worked out, and certainly don't understand this at all. But to go, this community goes so deep, 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 deep into these shadows, and you're embodying that beautifully and difficult. It's very difficult. These two messages together tell me that it's a sort of radical belief in this profound paradox that we're in right now. So beautifully described by the perinatal that Groff and Rick and Chris and others have all worked on. That somehow it is actually possible to come together as a species. And somehow focusing on that or believing in it or something is the logical connection between these two stories. And it's then that we might actually start to come together as a species. And we might actually start to feel the light that you're on this. I don't know how it all works because that's actually outside of my capacity to understand. Just like it's outside of the capacity of a baby in the birth canal to know what's on the other side. But it's a very numinous moment. The baby is somehow knows that it's numinous. Just like we all do here right now. And that's very heavy, but always numinous. So what it means for me is a radical belief in the impossible, in the most impossible situation, which is our moment on Earth right now.
Yeah, something's dying. So what's struggling to be born? Becca?
As soon as I decided I wanted to say something, my internal temperature just went up about 10 degrees and my heart started beating really fast.
I feel you there.
Yeah, so I'll just say that.
Yeah, say it.
Sounds good.
Feel it?
I was just thinking, as we're talking about contextualizing shame in a larger framework, and I had this pretty common bumper sticker flash into my mind of think globally, act locally. And I feel what's so important about what you're doing is, you know, when we work with these big ideas, it's so important to have these larger frameworks and understand this has a meaning, it's moving towards something. And then we say, well, what do we do? And what you're presenting us with is something that we do every day in the relationships that we already have, and that we don't actually have to go out to a larger framework, but actually just look at the person we wake up next to every morning and do the work right there. And it's not that it's actually not a move of, oh, I have to work on myself first before I can work on the world. It's actually you're doing it at the same time. And I'm just feeling that in a way that seems very clear right now. So I want to thank you for bringing that that microscope in, or maybe us turning around the telescope or something. So thank you.
Love it. Thank you so much for being able to vocalize so concisely. Yeah, exactly how I feel. And I believe in that more deeply than I think I believe in anything. And it took me a long time to figure that out. I always was like, oh, what's the problem? I'm in love with the cosmos. I trust the universe. Like, it's fine, you know? And I was like, wait, oh, damn, I don't love myself. Oh, man, that means, like, maybe I'm not always kind to the people around me in a good way. And I try to, like, manipulate and control them so I can, like, extract from them what I need to make myself feel better about myself. And take away their agency, or try to make them some kind of reflection of me instead of honoring our difference. Oh man, such a daily practice to wake up and do that inside of myself, and then the 1 foot around me, the 2 feet around me, and just gets this larger circle, and I'm like, I'll get to you as soon as I, like, you know, work out. So thanks for bringing that up. Here, and then back.
So, and maybe I would love to hear you take this and make it bigger.
Yeah.
But I think that maybe it's hard to define patriarchy because perhaps we haven't really experienced it. I think, like, to say that we've been in a father age when I know that my grandfather will admittedly, unabashedly say, 5 kids, I changed 3 diapers. He wasn't, he was a father, but not a father. I think that we haven't really even experienced the potential of what father can be. And I think that that makes me sad more than anything, is especially that we say patriarchy negatively, but we haven't even really seen like a father. And it can be such a beautiful thing. And I really want that to exist. I want to believe that, the person who's fathering my children, can be a father, and to not lump him in with this idea of patriarchy. And maybe this whole process has just been, obviously it's easier for us to be mothers because we birthed them, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that, but maybe it's harder to be a father. Maybe it takes 5,000 years or whatever to figure out how to do it, because you're not carrying it and birthing it.
Yeah, most definitely. What an existential crisis to be anatomically different than that which gave birth to you. That is a struggle I do not understand. And help me understand what that's like for you to be anatomically different than that which gave birth to you. Please let me understand what that's like. I want to help you with that. I want to go on that journey together and figure out how we can be with that in a way where I also don't shame you for being different than me, because I do that all the time. I'll admit sometimes I think I'm better than men, and come on, that's a joke too, but that's real. Let's help regulate it together and figure it out. Jesse?
Yeah, that actually dovetails with what I was feeling, which was sometimes feeling really uncomfortable with the word patriarchy when it's used. I often find myself feeling really defensive. I border on going into shame being a man. And so I find myself, when people use it, and it's usually used pejoratively and negatively, I find myself contract and get defensive and then almost angry. And then I get shamed because I'm like, oh shit, I'm patriarchal. I'm defending the men against the oppressed women. And it's really complicated. I haven't unpacked it. I just know that comes up for me frequently. And I know there's a cultural piece, there's also a personal piece, because I'm from a matriarchal line. My grandmother, my mother, my sister, I see it in my niece. And the men and the males in my family have been passive, weak alcoholics. So that's part of my psychology, and I think a lot of the shaming I received was through women, was through my mother, through my grandmother. So that shame carries that, and it's anatomically different.
Yeah.
And it's really confusing because I see that they're wounding through patriarchy, and they're wounded women, and then they try and nurture me, and I receive a wound. And it's very complex.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, this is just so, I just really appreciate this talk and this topic. I was in San Quentin today for 4 hours, and we had 75 men graduate from a program that I've been assisting called GRIP, Guiding Rage into Power. And the amount of everyone getting up there talking, from the inmates to the facilitators to the politicians to the senator, and all these people coming up from the prison system itself, and the constant talk and the words were about vulnerability, shame, and just expression of affect. The talk, how many times people talk about men crying. Jack Kornfield got up today and he just started crying, and it was so powerful. It was so healing, because especially in our culture, for men to be able to show their emotions, men have been told, I have been told, and I know most men experience being told, do not cry, do not show weakness, do not show vulnerability. And in the prison system, you literally could die if you doing that. So they call it the prison relief system, the prisoner relief system. And I was thinking, wow, the industrial prison complex, how much more, concretized and literalized could the metaphor of patriarchy be? And, we have over 2 million people locked away and incarcerated, the majority of which are racial minorities and people from the lower middle class. It's classist and it's racist structurally, and there just happen to be more men locked away than women, but it's so patriarchal, and someone from the system, from the prison system, got up from CDCR, correctional department, talking about how there's an R in there that was added on recently, and I can't remember the exact words, but they first were using it as
restraint or something, and they use it for reduction. And finally, through the whole process, they came to rehabilitation. Art stands for rehabilitation. And I was thinking just about that, rehabilitation, meaning reclaiming our shame and our bodies. And I don't know, something about this double-edged wound, where we're most wounded, being where we can be most effective and have our gifts and healing. And this idea of where that wound is, shame is our relational wound, that's where, if we can take that as initiation and take that as initiatory process downwards, and we can return and resurface, that to me seems the big.
Love it. Yes, so much. Here and then here and then here.
I used to teach guitar lessons, and it was an interesting process because I certainly over-prepared for my first lesson. I had a vision as to how much I can explain on that day, how the guitar functions, the different frets and scales and whatever, and I had to learn to slow that process down. With one person, we worked on one song for 12 months, and it took that long to finish it. But one of the things that struck me so intensely was how the most challenging thing for a student was the idea to improvise. When we managed to work through the 1-4-5 blues progression, the 12 bar blues, and then I would suggest let's get into improvisation. We start with the pentatonic. It's a fairly simple scale, visually appealing on the neck, and as soon as I would ask them to do it, they would shut down. And then the most intense students were the ones that had piano lessons beforehand, some of them for 8 years. And for these 8 years, they never have been asked to play anything of their own. And I thought, what kind of perpetuation is that of this regurgitating of other people's spiritual experience through music that we rob people from? And that makes me think that the reason, these moments of enchantment that I feel, particularly when I go to a concert, there's a form of magic that can happen. I get goosebumps, and I feel there's 15,000 people that are getting goosebumps with me. I don't even have to look, and I don't have to check. I know that it is happening. At the same time, on stage, I see this quasi shaman who has the potential to step out of being a performer and become a mystic, one who connects to the divine right in front of our eyes. In Northern Africa, they had this tradition. I think they were called moon dances, and performers and artists from far and wide would come together to celebrate for I think for a whole week. And ever so often they would recognize a person being on stage and walking through some invisible portal. And if it would happen, they would call it by its name, Allah. And that tradition was brought, I think it was the Moors that brought it into southern Spain. And we still hear it in the form of Olé. Allah turned into Olé. That recognition that the artist in some form has this exquisite opportunity on stage to transform into something magical and mystical. So that said, reflecting on the talk today, I don't want to isolate the possibility towards the stage, but perhaps we can look at our whole lives as our artistic expression. And with that comes the challenge of realizing what it means to be authentically present, integrated in yourself, that your words actually matter this time. How easy it is to represent a persona and even be judged for it because it isn't me. But as soon as it comes to what is my authentic self, I suddenly realize if you hurt me now, it's really gonna hurt. That's gonna sting for a long, long time. I might not sleep for a few days. So that said, maybe we can we can start looking at our lives as this artistic project. And with all the possibility for shame and judgment and the reasons why we might not complete our work, I also want to encourage us to feel some excitement or the beginner's mind. The youngest students I had were the most open to improvisation. Their face lit up as soon as they moved around the pentatonic, and you know, it was just like what I thought it was. This is evolution. I see it right now. This person is standing at the edge, and I understand it is fearful to stand at that edge, but I think that's where life happens.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much. I will begin by saying that I come from a matrilineal culture where the golden girl child is celebrated. So as I listen to your presentation, I'm going to share a little piece with my cultural lens. And I'm beginning to imagine a universe without women. And at the same time, I take a distance to also imagine a universe without men. Now with that, I want to take a soft launching part about the difference between a home and then a house. For me, a home is home by virtue of a woman. Uzi Ngumzi Ngumvasi. So there are many places or in patriarchal society, there seems to be so much of houses rather than homes because there is no balance. And because there is no balance of power, as you talk about shame, the cultural image that comes to my mind as far as shame is concerned is that a shame is like a puppy that is overfed and it is neither allowed to defecate or throw up. So that is a person who carries this kind of a shame within. And as time evolves, what happens? The puppy has to find its way of at least articulating the voice. And many people are still feeling or carrying the burden of shame because their voices have not been heard. And when I talk about a voice, what do I mean? There was a family, and then a man and his wife were living so happily, but the man was the controller of affairs. So one day, the man punched the wife, and out of anger, the wife decided to leave the matrimonial home. So as the woman left, the man was alone, a universe where a man was alone. And in the process, the man couldn't cope. So he had to go back to find ways and means to bring the woman. But this time, when the woman was coming back to the home, the woman said that based upon this experience, I will never speak to this man. So they live together and they never speak to one another. The man will talk, the woman respond by writing. So on this fateful day, the man decided to search for the wife's voice. So he woke up in the morning, turning everything in the house upside down, going to the bookshelf, opening every page, bringing our carpet and everything. And the wife was surprised, what is it that my husband is searching for? Until late in the evening, so the woman just asked the man, dear, what are you looking for? And the man said, I have found it. And the husband said, what? The wife said, what have you found? And the woman responded, the man said, your voice. That I've lived with you for all this while and I can't find your voice. Now with this, I can see that shame can lead to the articulation of a voice, especially where women's subjugation is at the table. And today I've seen a true demonstration of a voice that is coming out. And that is you. The way you are a teacher, a dancing teacher, I will simply define as a dancing teacher, associating actions, miming, gestures with your presentation to articulate this kind of a voice. It's so moving. So I would just want to encourage you and to contribute so that we all find this way of voicing out so that the other party will know that the other side also matters. So that we will not be walking around like conscious cops, as puppies, overfed, neither allowed to throw up or defecate. And that is, it's more than the dangerous time bomb which we need to defuse. This is my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Very touched. Thank you so much. Right back here.
Thank you. Let's see, I don't know where I'm going to start.
Speak up, especially with this sounds loud.
Okay, I'm going to talk louder. You're just a fireball. Shame. I am shame. That's basically, I think when I was a little kid, when I first got glasses, I put my so I could actually see somebody, and I looked out and I did not like what I saw. You guys, I mean, you were scary. You scared the shit out of me. I'm like, all these people looking back at me. And at that point, I said, you know, I don't want to look at you because, you know, I don't want anybody looking at me. Don't look at me. Even, I mean, I still, I mean, I'm struggling with that. I don't like people looking at me, staring at me.
Yeah.
And for you to get up there and just be always, that's for me, that's like amazing to do that. But, so I am ashamed, and the thing about it is, I discounted, like, now here I go, I'm kind of floating around, but it's a powerful word. I came, you know, tears came, and I love crying. Someone told me it's self-indulgent and cry. Now I'll tell you that. You said something about, you know, your heart broke. You said a lot of things, and I stepped away because I had a prayer occasion downstairs. But this thing, I had to forgive all you guys. I had to forgive this whole freaking planet. I had to, and I have to do that. I have to, like you were saying, I have to. My heart hurts constantly, but I have to keep forgiving. I must forgive. I'm in a state of constant pain and forgiveness, and then joy. Because I don't carry all that with me anymore. I'm just simply, you know, I'm light. You know, just the way it is. I mean, I do go through my struggle, and I do battle, but there's no mention of, you know, shame. It's almost, when I talk about shame, I feel so amazing because it's like that was just so mean. That was so mean from just the very young age that I was shamed. That's the one word, shameful. I was ashamed of who I was. I was this feminine little sissy, crybaby, shy. If you looked at me, I would turn beet red. I thought I would never stop turning red. Never. I thought this was stuck there. I got nervous. I lift, couldn't talk. So matriarch, I don't know. I do know my dad objectified women, and my dominant older brother, and my dad. Basically, we always had to cheese them all. We are the true, you know. And they tried to toughen me up. They tried to make a man out of me. So, you know, here is, you know, this struggling, overly sensitive crybaby, you know, people trying to toughen me up. And I just kept crying. But I just suppressed it. When I got all my shit in here, basically I'd run to my bed, put the cover over my head. I'd wake up the next day, and everything's fine. So I was just, whatever that was. So, I don't really know where I'm going with the message, but I just, I love the idea of, you guys all have shame, and you're just like this, and it's just like, okay.
Yes.
I think I'll end that.
Thank you so much for sharing yourself with us.
Shameful.
Yeah. Shameful and proud. Out and proud.
I'm blushing.
Hells yeah.
Vulnerability. I love being vulnerable today.
Yeah.
Make me write some poetry and I'll read for it. Fill me up and I'll read it and I'll make a fool of myself and I'll walk away and skip it. I'm done.
Yay, thank you. Max, if you still want, and then Sam.
Yeah, well thank you, Jessica. You always teach me a lot about myself. But I want to talk about patriarchy. And I want to talk about women's role in patriarchy. Because we tend to think of patriarchy as, as what men do. And I've been coming to this realization that I think women have played a fundamental role in patriarchy. And I don't know if you ever saw the movie Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover.
Oh, yeah.
But basically, everything he was doing was for his mother. And she was kind of the mind behind him. And I think a lot of times what we do is maybe not accurately what we should be doing, but a lot of times what we do is for our lover or for our mother, or to kind of show our strength, or to show, to beat our chest for a woman. So I'm just interested in what you think about women's roles in patriarchy, and how that can shift and be part of the change.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I'd love for some women to maybe help chime in on this with me. I'm very aware in myself that I want the men in my life to both not be men and be men at the same time. Meaning, I want you to be vulnerable, and I want you to feel your emotions, and I want you to be intimate with me, but I also want you to be certain all the time. I want you to know what's going on. I want you to be in control. I want you to be put together. Like, I want you to be on top of it. But I also want you to be vulnerable and rest in the uncertainty with me. And it's this what is that, such a contradiction. And I have a lot of shame around the way that I'm patriarchal. And I don't even really understand it yet. I'm just beginning to get glimpses of how I perpetuate it by how I treat particularly the men in my life, or how we as a society raise our boys. I mean, mothers do most of the raising in here, and so who's telling you not to cry? Who's treating you different than you would treat your daughter? I don't know, it's us. So, women.
Let's say that's simply anecdotal. I understand your dilemma, because maybe this is maybe anecdotal.
Please.
But I was told in Scandinavia and Sweden, where they've had a lot of equality between men and women for a lot longer than North America. And if you actually go to the Scandinavian countries, you see a lot of sharing of childcare. Like I remember being in Copenhagen at 5 o'clock, and there are all these men with babies, and it was really unusual for me to see that. There was much more equality. I remember being at my aunt's house, and all the men got up. We had a big family party, and all the men got up and did the dishes. And certainly this is really quite foreign to me. So we're living in a country that men really share in the domestic responsibility, and women share in the financial responsibility of the family. So what's happening in Sweden, though, I've heard, is that all the women, not all the women, but many women are falling madly in love with all the new immigrants from Islamic countries who come from patriarchal culture. And so they're madly in love. So, I can understand your dilemma. What's with that? It's all the things that women are asking for, and yet when they're offered something else, something more primal, then that's what they're attracted to. So I don't think that answers any question. That just sort of that just shows how strange it really is.
It ignites something in me. We'll come here real quick and then Sam. But so if I don't want the men in my life to be in power and control, so oftentimes when I don't want to take responsibility for myself, I give my power away to the man, and I want him to make the decision so I can have a vacation that day. I don't want to be responsible for myself right now, and I don't want to take care of myself, so could you just do it right now? But then I'm gonna get mad at you if you start telling me what to do, or being controlling or dominating of me. So it's just, it's a bit of a mind fuck that I need to come to a place of like, okay, I'm gonna take responsibility for myself and stand in my power and my agency and like be like, okay, what do I want? That means I have to be in touch with my desires, which is terrifying because there's so much shame around that. So like, yeah, I think us women have to start feeling, giving voice to our desires and stop giving our power to you and then getting mad at you for having power over us. So sorry about that, but I'm working on it.
I think that in every program at CIS, there has been a class where the issue of the masculine and the feminine, or growing up in patriarchy comes up, and I talk to the guys who were in the class, and they didn't speak. And they didn't speak because it's like we have to simplify it to talk about it, but it's so much more complex than we can grasp. And I think it's why I personally shy away from conversations about the masculine and the feminine or patriarchy. Like, that's a word that I hardly ever use because I don't want anyone to feel responsible just because of their sexual organs, because I would much rather talk about the solar and the lunar, because it's not located within someone's sexual organs, and I think that, but we have to talk about it. We have to talk about it, and we have to learn how to talk about it. And I remember, I think it was Dina Metzger, I was listening to someone and they said, whenever you have a wounded feminine, you have a wounded masculine. You can't have a wounded, or if you ever have a wounded woman, you have a wounded man. Like, and so how do we have these conversations without locating the cause of the suffering that has been caused by power struggles that have been structured and carried out because of the differentiation of men and women? How do we talk about it now in a way that we don't isolate ourselves from each other, that we stay in it together? And probably just by being conscious of that and being able to name that I want to talk about rape, or I want to talk about the feminine, knowing that it lives within everybody in this room, and so does the masculine. And then there's a differentiation of men and women, and it can get confusing. And then there's transsexual. It's just like it's so complex, and so then it becomes so hard to even approach talking about, because just to simplify it seems to segregate in a way that you don't want to set up the conversation. So anyway, Jesse, what you brought up made me think of that, and Max, some of what you said made me think of that, and yeah, it's just, it's a struggle, and I think, but a really important and worthy conversation to figure out how to have. And I hope I get to talk about it more, because I'd like to learn better how to have that conversation, and not just in my women's group.
Yeah.
Lydia, when we were at Esalen on the music night, PCC was doing its thing, and then you were over in the other room, and you pulled in this beautiful man, and we were doing our music, and then we had an energy shift, and in that energy shift, it was you bringing in this other man, and he told the story of his I don't remember, his daughter?
Granddaughter.
Yeah. And he instantly became a synchronicity for me, or an icon for me of, that's not patriarchy. He was there for his daughter's birth. And it was such a beautiful moment. The whole energy in the room shifted. And I was in awe. And it gave me some sort of archetypal information about this larger process, Mother Earth with Father Sky. That guy was there for his daughter's birth. And there was something very magical in that story that he told, and we all felt it. And I started to wonder if some of our answers lied in that kind of synchronicity, that kind of story that he told artistically.
Thanks, Josh and Lydia. I'm aware that we're at time, but I also want to honor the fact that Sam's hand was raised, and I'm just wondering if you want to speak to kind of bring us home.
This is big. One thing that comes up, it's hard to tease out patriarchy because, again, like, as was pointed out, it's so associated with man. And this notion, we've only experienced in human history we have one track of human history to work with, a sample size of one. So much of what we experience, it's hard to tease out whether it is inherent to patriarchy or if it is a particular flavor or potential expression of patriarchy. And is there potentials for dominating and non-dominating forms of patriarchy, and then in some potential instances maybe matriarchy? And it's so hard to tease these things out, but one thing that comes to mind a lot when I hear the word patriarchy is, at least in our flavor that we've experienced, a kind of granting of hegemony or centrality to particular forms of ontology and epistemology that are very rational and very empirical in nature. What Josh said was really powerful, and this notion of the impossible happening and humanity coming together to be reborn and to make it through this. That very thing happened at Burning Man. There was a big experience that happened among a lot of people, and it was extremely powerful, and there was this large feeling of rebirth, and it was very transformative for a lot of people, and a lot of it had to do with opening up and navigating by way of faculties that are very non-rational. And I think a lot of us, a lot of people make their way here by those very faculties, by opening up to these things that are non-rational or not given validity within the forms of ways of knowing and ascertaining what is real that our particular flavor of patriarchy has established over time. Now, I also want to point out, and this had a lot to do with my experience at Esalen, that there was a real revisiting of my own personal shame, and it has so much to do with patriarchy and notions of manhood, adulthood, and strength, and that all that is so convoluted with this patriarchy thing that it's for all those same reasons very hard to tease out. But being, at least in my experience, a male who is extremely vulnerable a lot of the times, very open about emotions and transparent in that way, but in some ways, a lot of what I reconnected with was a kind of grieving and a mourning of the loss of those qualities that I think are more traditionally associated with manhood in this society. And there was shame around a lot of it, but there was also a genuine grieving of their absence, both in a sense of in my life and in the way that I've cultivated them, and a very grave sense of their necessity and the strength that those qualities have that I think all of us are going to need to call upon and embody in certain ways in order to make it through this transition. So
there's this really subtle challenge in holding what feels like a paradox and feels very antithetical between overcoming patriarchy without abandoning those qualities within what patriarchy has come to be associated with that are necessary. So, you know, I guess the way I experience this is almost in my life, there's kind of been a reckless abandoning of some of those qualities to chase these more non-rational ways of being. You know, they're kind of calling back a little bit, at least in my experience. So that's just the one thing. As we try to overcome patriarchy, overcoming and yet in some sense trying to include.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sam. Just want to thank each and every single one of you for being here tonight. I just honor each one of you so much and send you infinite, wild blessings. So, thank you.